Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread. I'm coming to you from the Hance Auditorium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've held the last 4 bread symposiums, and as you can see, there's nobody here but me. And this is where we usually have it. The seats are all empty because this year, thanks to you, the symposium will be presented online, virtually, in our new presentation hall, which is where I will join you in just a minute. Thank you, and thanks for being part of our new virtual Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Welcome again. Throughout the entire symposium, I'll be thanking our generous sponsors over and over again, and ask that you do as well by visiting their booths and pavilions in the exhibitor hall. There you will see lots of bonus content, and you can also make appointments to meet with the folks from these companies that serve our baking community so well. Our presenting sponsor is Puratos, who has partnered with us from the very beginning for all of our symposiums, and it is their support that helped us get this one-of-a-kind gathering of thought leaders off the ground. Please also visit our fabulous flour and milling sponsors, Ardent Mills, Lindley Mills, and Central Milling. Thank you also to our equipment sponsors, the WP Bakery Group and Allied Bakery and Food Service Equipment. And thank you also to our specialty food product companies, Probiotine, Fire Within, Big Green Egg, and Mock Mill. Please check out all of their booths to learn about their wonderful and unique products. And also thanks to our media sponsors, Cook's Country, The Local Palate, the James Beard Foundation, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You'll be hearing more about all of them throughout the entire series of presentations. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. At the end of today's presentation, you will also see our credit scroll, thanking all of the people behind the scenes who made this event possible, including our production and technical partner, Ganoid Communications, our creative team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University, our hosts for this, our 4th annual gathering. So stick around, if you will. But now, it's time to get things rolling with today's presentation, so let's go live. And once again, welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Well, hello, and welcome to our last demo Wednesday. It's hard to believe. It feels like this cycle of presentations was going to go on forever, but today is our final Wednesday demonstration presentation, and we're really excited and proud to have Chef Richard Coppedge with us today from the Hudson Valley, deep in the Hudson Valley at the famous Culinary Institute of America, from your kitchens there. Chef, welcome to the symposium, and thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I know we're going to get into some gluten-free baking in a second. I just want to make a couple quick announcements to all of you who have joined us today. And that is, of course, while today is our last demonstration day, we do have 2 Mondays still left. Next Monday, we have Josh Allen, who's the owner of Companion Baking in St. Louis, Missouri, who's got a very interesting presentation. I've actually seen a preview of it, and he calls it Trash Talk. And it's all about how essentially he saved his company, his bakery, by recognizing how they could affect the bottom line by paying attention and tracking their waste and the way that, and how much they were losing out the back door, and in so doing was able to turn the entire numbers around and bring a whole new energy to the company. It's a great presentation, and please join us for that on Monday. It's a good follow-up to the one we had 2 days ago on Monday about innovative use of unsold bread, but this kind of brings it full circle. And then the following Monday, our final presentation will be a conversation with Dave Dahl, the founder of Dave's Killer Breads. So that'll be our kind of wrap-up session. So we're coming to the end, but before we do, we want to get one more demonstration under our belt. And Chef, it looks like what you've got for us today is some, looks from what I'm seeing in the camera, some bagels, gluten-free bagels. Is that what they are?
Yes, sir.
Fantastic. That's something that comes up a lot. People ask about that. We have a lot of attendees at the symposium who are passionate gluten-free bakers, some who have done some writing and recipe development in the gluten-free sector, but everybody's affected by this now. It's no longer a sort of a celiac issue anymore. It's really a societal issue. People are concerned about cutting gluten, even if they're not allergic or sensitive to gluten.
Well, yeah, especially, the forefront is for the celiac and the severely gluten intolerant. And, myself, I don't have celiac, thank goodness. I'm not gluten intolerant, but, when a curriculum change came my way about 15 years ago, like yourself, Peter, I was happy teaching baguettes. And then I had to figure out how to make gluten-free baguettes and things with different ingredients. And it's been a very good journey, and it's a pleasure. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, if you would mind, before we start on the demo, just real quickly, like a quick recap. I know you've been at the CIA for a long time. I remember
you're number 30 right now.
Yeah, I was going to guess about 30 years. And I first kind of met you, but encountered you in videos that you did as the assistant to the famous Professor Raymond Calvel.
Yes.
Was one of the turning points, in my opinion, for the American artisan baking community, was his visits to America and the presentations that you guys taped and made available to the growing artisan baking community. What was that experience like?
It was wonderful. Even though I didn't speak French, he didn't speak English. And it was ironic, his wife is an English professor at the time. But, just watching him shaping the baguette, and, now when I need to go shape a baguette, I go into the bread's classroom, and I still shape it that same way with that little twisting action that I learned from him. And it helped to bring my bread to a level a lot higher. And like you said, it also brought, I think, awareness to the country of really good bread.
Yeah, it was really almost like the first time that somebody put some language and science behind this notion of pre-ferments and how to evoke more flavor from your flour by using technique. And I know I used to show those videos to every bread class that I had during my first years of teaching those classes. So thank you for doing that and being part of that. That must have been really kind of fun.
Yeah, and also, from there, again, the gluten-free, it was kind of baptism by fire, by trial and error, and it worked out. And one thing led to another. Started teaching some other additional classes for the public. And then someone said, you should write a book. And I said, there's no way I'm writing a book. But then I ended up writing a book, and it actually put those two fans of mine at ease, so they could buy the book and stop following me around. And that book's been out, I believe, now about 13 or 14 years, I believe. So
hard to believe. The time goes by so fast, because when it came out, it really was. You introduced some new concepts to the gluten-free. I'll say it, the growing category itself of gluten-free books. But and the first thing I noticed about it, because I've got my copy right here, and I reference it a lot, is the various blends, the different blends of ingredients and flour blends that you could create to kind of mix and match depending on the kind of products you were making.
Right. Yeah. And now if you were to search online, you'll find so many different flour blends. And one thing I'll say about flour blends is whoever's book you are using, you want to follow their instructions to whatever blend that they are endorsing, whether you're making a blend as part of the book or you're purchasing a blend out in the consumer market, because they've engineered their formulas to work that way. And things are so much better because the demand and the international gluten-free standard of less than 20 parts per million has really brought the celiacs and the gluten intolerant people out of the closet, and they can feel like they have a voice and options of good food. So it really helps the bakers. I think the biggest thing, as many of the audience know, is determining if you're going to go gluten-free manufacturing wise, is you've got to keep your gluten count below the standard of less than 20 parts per million. And, contamination is a problem. And so, whenever I teach gluten-free in my classroom, first thing we have to do is clean. And then we break out the ingredients and then we go from there. So,
right. It's a life and death matter for many people.
Correct.
Yes. A little exposure. So I'd like to give you as much time as possible to dive into your demo. So
sure. I'd like to get started. Yep. So making some bagels, and I used to work in a bagel shop many years ago, and actually in Providence, and I learned traditional bagels are boiled, in order to gelatinize the starch and give them that chewiness. I experimented with my book with a gluten-free recipe, which was, it works, but this one I think is a lot better. But the concept is the same. But the big idea or difference is, it's not a physical dough that you can traditionally handle, but I can still cook it and poach it in the water and then bake it. So I'm going to get started by what I've done is kind of a la from Professor Calbell, is I'm making a simple pre-ferment. So you have the recipe available to access. And I'm taking my teff flour, my buckwheat, my sorghum flour, and instant yeast right here. And I'm going to mix that with the water. And you'll notice it's a lot of whole grain flours, but that way you get a lot of natural enzyme activity to get this pre-ferment going. It's also very wet.
While you're doing that, just let me jump in and say we're going to post this recipe. I think there's going to be a link posted. Gita, if you could post it in the chat so that people can link over to the recipe if they want to bring it up while Chef is working on it. And then where that recipe now also lives in the recipe folder section in our dashboard. So you will all have access to this recipe. And while you're doing that, could you also, I know we I think titled this, today's presentation, New Techniques for a New Time. And that you said this is even an improved version of your bagels. What have you learned in the last, 14 years that has allowed you to kind of even push this to a next stage?
I think more options on flours. If you look at a lot of gluten-free commercial products 20, 15 years ago, the average consumer would say, if that's all that's available, it has the texture that's not very palatable. It might be dry, it might be crumbly. And I think the use of more whole grains, like such as sorghum or teff, can give you more options. It can also increase the fiber, so it could be better nutritionally for someone's diet. And I found that was the biggest thing. But also, with some gluten-free products, when you can soak the flour, especially if you're using a lot of rice flour, if you can pre-hydrate, kind of like, as you know, the term in autolyse,
yeah,
you can then give that flour a chance to swell and expand, so it's not fighting for the liquid competition when it goes in, say, the oven. Right, so you have a softer mixture. So with this pre-ferment, it's just simple. I'm wearing a glove. I just mix all the dry ingredients. I add it in my water, and then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a little bit of rice flour, and I'm going to just put it on top. It could be white rice. It could be brown rice. It could even be buckwheat or teff if you want. It's just a layer. And what I do is, because this is so wet, it's going to help indicate when it's ready. Given that it's gluten-free, it's not going to have that gluten matrix where you can actually physically touch it and get a response and see a lot of cell structure. But the indicator is generally when it starts to break through this flour layer. So with the magic of TV,
yeah,
and you should let it go for about an hour and a half. You could do it longer in the refrigerator, but you can see here the difference.
Wow.
This one's about just over an hour, and you'll see the cracking that it's starting to break through, and it's actually doming a little bit. And what I'll just show you is, if we look inside of the one I just made, right, you can see that you don't really see any viscosity or stretching. But if we look at this one to my right, there, you can see a big difference.
Wow.
And you can, that's just, as you know, it's fermentation. And It's actually, it has a nice fermented flavor. So that's my indicator with the cracking of the flour surface. And also too, generally, if a regular proof box is not properly cleaned, I would just leave this out in the clean bake shop with a necessary plastic wrap over the top of the bowl to reduce that contamination factor. But now this is ready, so I'm going to utilize it in my final mixture. And in the final mixture, what I have in the mixer over here is I have all my dry ingredients, and the dry ingredients include white rice flour, potato starch, guar gum. Guar gum is a hydrocolloid. It's used in a lot of manufactured products, but most definitely it's probably one of the #1 ingredients sought after for gluten-free bakers, unless they're buying, say, xanthan gum. Egg white powder, which is what the weightlifters will purchase and make their milkshakes out of sometimes. Tapioca starch, a little bit of soy flour, some salt, instant dry yeast. Whether it's red or gold, that really doesn't matter in this case because there's no sugar or very low pH scenarios. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blend all these dry ingredients together first. Now this recipe is going to fill up this bowl right to the top.
Wow.
So there we go. So, a 20-quart mixer is like perfect. I'm using this one based on the demonstration area that I have. So, but you want to mix your dry ingredients, especially so they're uniform and complete, but especially so the guar gum, because the guar gum is a hydrocolloid. When it gets wet, it gets sticky, it gets gummy, and it continues to get sticky and gummy. You want to protect it with something dry. So in this case, there are all these dry ingredients.
So can you explain a little bit about what hydrocolloid means?
Well, basically, they are carbohydrates. The guar gum is made from the guar seed. Xanthan gum is a fermented manufactured hydrocolloid. If you look on the back of like a commercial ice cream or some bottled smoothies, you'll see guar, xanthan, locust bean gum, carrageenan.
Yeah.
Those are all categorized as hydrocolloids, and they literally, for manufacturers, it helps to improve the texture or viscosity or the drinkability, say in a smoothie, because it provides that kind of like, it's like a thickening agent, but it's not protein based, it's carbohydrate based, and it has a significant fiber contribution that can be attributed to your product.
It's really a very small amount that percentage-wise that goes into it.
Yeah, it's very small, and just a side note, it's best to put it in the dry ingredients, and it's one of those ingredients that you want to keep it. You want to know where it is when you're not using it. You want to keep it secure because there is a risk of a choking hazard for anyone that inadvertently ingests it, and that's just a precaution, especially for home bakers, because it likes to get wet, and it doesn't like rinse off your hands. The best way to get any of that off of your hands is with something dry like sugar.
Oh.
It will exfoliate your skin. It will pull the gum off, and then you can apply soap and water. So, but
Interesting.
The bigger thing is with the gums, and there's kind of two schools of thought on it. There will be some gluten-free bakers who will use higher levels because they're trying to mimic the dough-like texture that they're used to in their gluten-based bread. I'm not as fond of that. I went the other way. I go with a looser textured product. Many of the gluten-free bread recipes in my book, you have to use a pan to hold and support the shape.
Yeah.
In this case, it's different because the level of guar gum is a little higher. But those are some of the differences you'll find from one baker to another. And it's like, it's like a comfort zone, whether it's like boxers or briefs. I mean, it's what, you really think works.
Yeah.
And I know this is my undergarment that works for me. So.
And is there a reason why you prefer the guar over the xanthan, or is it functionally, do they function differently?
They're very similar. Guar gum is a natural hydrocolloid from the guar seed, commonly grown in Western Asia, India, Pakistan. Xanthan gum is man-made. It can be quite expensive, and some sources of xanthan gum are corn-derived. And if there's someone who has a sensitivity to corn, but again, the bigger thing is respect how they work. You don't need to use too much unless you really want to use a lot. But It's like the day, that character you and I grew up with, Gumby. It's like the day Gumby was born. It'll get really, really gummy if you use too much.
Yeah.
And then you can't work it because it's going to be overreactive.
Okay. Good to know.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, I have now, so take the pre-ferment, which is fermented. I have my dry ingredients already mixing. I'm going to take and mix in my liquid to the pre-ferment. So in this container, I have my cold water and I have liquid egg whites. So I'm using dried egg whites in the dry mix. I'm using fresh liquid egg whites because, egg white protein to me is as close to gluten as you can get without it being gluten.
Okay. Good.
Right.
And protein, of course, is something that people always want more of.
Well, especially as bakers, because it really can make or break our ability to produce things, like a nice baguette.
Yeah.
I will say this to you that, whomever, if it was me or if someone else can develop that gluten-free concept where you have the texture that you and I can then shape like a regular baguette, I'm in. I'm ready to stay that way. But for now, it's a simple fit by using a little different texture, and you'll see that. So now I'm going to add this in. So the pre-ferment has been diluted with the cold water and liquid egg whites. It's going to mix it up. And then I'm going to pour it all in to the mixer. And I'm just going to mix it only for a few minutes, actually. But again, the key is you want to knowingly be aware that the dry ingredients, especially the guar gum, is completely mixed. And I've seen it where someone adds the guar gum too late. It'll literally stick like little clumps, and they'll get tighter and tighter because they are trying to draw in any surrounding liquid, and then they can't, they're not getting distributed within the remaining ingredients. So
while that's mixing, a question came in. There might be a typo on the recipe. Let me get clarification. As someone's asking, it says 96 grams of instant yeast. Is that supposed to be 9.6 grams or something like that?
Yes, that should be 9.6.
Okay, Michael, thanks for catching that. And so for everyone who's watching on the recipe, we'll get that changed before when we post it. 9.6 grams. So somewhere between 9 and 10 grams of yeast.
Oh, thank you. So you can see in the mix, it's not a dough. It's definitely not a dough, but it has some texture. I'm listening to the mixer. You're basically just smoothing it out. You can turn the speed up to say a slightly higher speed, but not for long. And what that will do is that will kind of agitate the gum within the confines of the mixture. And secondly, it can also increase the strength of the egg white protein. Think about when you whip up egg whites for meringue. So I can actually hear a little bit of popping. That's the air coming out. That's kind of like gluten-based, but it's not gluten. The color will get a little lighter. If you go very long, it'll get lighter in color because you're getting the whitening of the egg whites.
So it's kind of like whipping the oxygen into there.
Yes, correct. So I can see a texture. It's walking away from the bottom of the bowl.
Yeah.
And
it's actually much more dough-like than I was expecting. I thought it was going to be like a really wet batter.
Right, but now, as you can see, as soon as I touch it, it's like glue. It's all over my fingers. Yeah, that's where the fun begins. So
that's why we need new techniques in a new time.
Yeah. Actually, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some cold water, and I'm going to use that, a bowl of cold water. Now, I'm going to use a pastry bag, and I'm also going to do it kind of by hand. But the pastry bag, kind of like an extruding device, if you will. I don't need a tip, okay? And I'm just going to basically fill up my bag with some of this. You want to call it a dough. I'm not going to call it a batter, but it's a very wet dough batter. You can use paste, but you need that to form the shape. And then from there, I put these in the freezer to allow them to kind of tighten up from the cooler temperature. And, for those of us who have made enough bagels, when a bagel has been shaped with a bagel machine or by hand, you put it on a cornmeal covered board, you put it on a rack, you're going to cover it probably with a vinyl cover, and you're going to place it into a refrigerator for maybe a couple of days to let the gluten relax. And then you're going to process your bagels as you need them. So I'm going to use the pastry bag, and then I'll show you the hand-shaped method in just a few minutes. So I'm going to take the bag, take a sheet tray, and just literally pipe my rings. So
it looks like you've got parchment down there?
Yep, I've got parchment. You can, I've got a little bit of cornmeal on it, so they'll be easy to pull off. Another way to do it is you can use a little bit of oil, just lightly coat. But first I'm going to take a little bit of my mixture, and I'm going to lock down. It's kind of like when we made eclairs.
Yeah, it kind of looks like choux paste, doesn't it?
Yeah, but as you know, it's not cooked, but it has that choux paste like texture. And it really will give you a workout on your shaping because you really got to squeeze it. And that's where I think a machine that's an extruding device with the right pressure and flow rate can give you that shape. So just shape a few here. So you literally just squeeze, let it come out, and then lead, kind of like string work for icing. Go just past. And then I'm just going to take a little cold water and smooth it out.
Cool.
Like ceramics.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you really want to get your hands involved, then literally you can pipe it out. You have to work kind of fast. You pipe out a strip. I think this would be a good activity for home. Someone, is baking with some children and they want to keep them occupied.
Yeah.
A little bit of cold water, kind of pick it up, a little bit from the table, like so. And then, but I like the bag. The bag works, I can control it, the flow rate.
Yeah.
This might require a little more shaping, but again, that's something where you could also do different shapes, but I'm trying to do a traditional ring-shaped bagel.
Right.
And
but it's kind of cool that you can work with that dough. If your hands are wet, the bench is wet, then it won't. Yeah. It's malleable and formable.
Right. But again, the bag technique, it gives you good wrist strength for your arms and your wrists.
Yeah.
And you can control it. But I think in a production manner, something that's pressurized, extruding device. Maybe there's one out there. I haven't seen it yet, but you could then knock out many of these. I think your bigger concern, of course, is making sure your environment is the correct environment. It's a clean environment. So now these would go to the freezer. Okay, a couple hours. After that, you can then bag them up, or you should wrap them in plastic. So like I made some earlier at this state, froze them, uncovered, and then I bagged them for better storage. But you don't want them to be too exposed for too long to the freezer because then they might form a crust that you really want to try to avoid.
Okay, but freezing is critical to this process because it allows you to be able to lift them and drop them into the...
Yeah, I mean, I know someone might say, well, it's not a traditional bagel. Well, it's not because it's not gluten, but again, in my comfort zone, I work with things that are more loose, and freezing this is going to help to control it. So then I can pick it up. So like, for example, again, the magic of video.
Yeah.
So here I have some.
All right.
And say, I can pick them up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
So what I'm going to do now is, say the next day, I'm going to poach the bagels. And I'm going to then garnish them and put them in the oven.
Somebody asked, the dry ingredients were mixed for quite some time. Do the dry ingredients need to be mixed that long? Or is that just a consequence of talking while we were working?
Yes, that's more the consequence of you and I chatting.
All right.
And, no, literally a minute, if you notice, I'm using a paddle. Let me go back. I've never personally have used a dough hook for a gluten-free item because the mixtures are typically, for me, they're more wet. There's more of a liquid content. It's more like a pat a shoe paste. There's no gluten to form.
Yeah.
So, as you all know, a gluten-based dough uses a dough hook based on its design. So I use this and it works. It smooths everything out.
Yeah, the paddle makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. To mix this by hand, you can do it, but, you're going to be really sticky.
Yeah.
But your fingers are going to kind of emulate the shape of a paddle, but simple paddle is all you need. So,
right.
All right. So, at this point, all right, I have my liquid. And, this is just an estimate of the recipe to use. You can vary it yourself. I have, water that's been at a simmer. And I have my, I have molasses and honey in there. It looks like a nice, overly steep tea. Okay.
We're not, the camera's not catching the boiling water.
Just a minute.
But that bowl that's there in front of you, is that an ice bath water?
No, that bowl is the ice bath.
Yeah, okay. Now we see the pot boiling.
Yep, I'm gonna slide it over just a little bit. How's that?
Yeah, that's working. That's good.
Okay, and I'm gonna have my ice bath right near your pot.
Did you say you put some malt in the water?
Not malt. No. You're trying to trick me. No.
Oh, no, I didn't. I realized as the words went out of my mouth that you can't use malt. Right.
I thought you were trying to stump me there for a minute.
No, it just looks like malt. It's dark.
Well, it does, but you made a great point. As many of us bakers know, the word malting is associated with the germinating of the grain, but most typical malted grain is barley, which they use a lot. We use it, they add it to flour. They use it in beer making, but you could search and buy like a malted sorghum, okay? But what I'm using is I have some molasses and I have some honey.
Molasses, okay.
Basically equal parts, have it look like the color of tea, have it at a steady simmer, and, time to poach. I mean, a traditional bagel is poached in order to, gelatinize some of the starch to give it more chewiness, so you have more of a chewier texture, AKA, as people would say, it's a water bagel.
Yeah, a water bagel, yeah. And they're floating immediately. I mean, you didn't give them really any fermentation time.
No, the last two I put in are floating right away. There's some that are starting to come up. They might need a little encouragement. The one on the bottom there is starting to float. But you want to cook them for about a minute and a half. You want to get as much of that, because these are very cold too. So we want to give the center of the bagel a chance for the starches to really receive that temperature change.
Okay, great.
Now they're really starting to float.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to shock them in some ice water. Then I would garnish them. And, I remember when I worked at that one bagel shop, we had a kettle that was this big around. We had a spider tool that was this big.
Right.
We would put 2 to 3 dozen bagels from the boards right into the kettle, which had malted barley syrup in it. And then, very labor intensive, we would dump them out into a table-like sink that was in front of the deck oven. And there are still some bakeries that do that, but it's very, tedious work. And then we would have cold running water, and we would have these wooden boards that were lined, sometimes they were metal, and they were lined with burlap.
Yeah.
And that's how you would process your traditional water bagels. Cook them first to gelatinize a lot of the starch. And then you're putting a wet bagel into a deck oven. That's why you had to use the board, because the board would prevent the bagel from sticking.
Uh-huh.
So if you were weak in your arms, you got really strong in the bagel shop because you would have to reach into the 500-degree hot oven.
Yeah.
And literally turn and pull the boards out. You flip the bagels, you throw them back out onto the sink.
Wow.
You would wash them with more water. You would reset them up with your seeds. You would always start with probably your plain bagels first. Then you would go to like poppy. Then you go to sesame. Then maybe some salt. And then that's how the everything garnish on a bagel literally came to light.
The last one.
Your seeds were so expensive.
Yeah.
And you'd be throwing all these seeds down the drain, and it's like you'd set up a catch-all system before the drain, and you would save those seeds, dry them out, and then you can do your everything bagel. So
back then, they never realized that the everything bagel was going to be not only the catch-all bagel, it was going to be the bagel of choice.
Right. It was like the leftover seedling bagel that turned into this wonderful thing. So.
Yeah. It's amazing now there's all these everything bagel toppings that people are using in all different other applications.
Right. So now I'm going to garnish them. Got some seeds.
I have a practical question for you regarding the part. So I know that for me, but bagels, because that starch does get gummy and everything, that I find that if I don't spray the parchment paper with some pan spray or something, even if I put cornmeal down, it still tends to stick. Do you find that to be the case, or do you not have that problem?
No, it tends. I agree with that. You could pat them dry a little bit, but that's where, in the classic sense, where they go in the deck oven.
Yeah.
You have the board. You would literally dry them upside down on the board in the oven.
Yeah.
Actually, I did that this morning when I came in, when I was experimenting, and they worked okay. It's just a lot of, you have to be careful the board is the right size. So the gluten-free bagel could be prone to falling off the board.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But so, I mean, you can take a towel and pat them, right? I'm just going to brush it off, but I have enough cornmeal. I'm not too worried about it.
Okay, good. So it'll come off. Okay.
Yeah. All right. And then, of course, but see, now they have a little shininess to them because of the cooking. So in fact, let me take this one here, break it open. And, it's hard to see the texture because it's gluten-free. But there is, it literally gelatinized probably about halfway to the middle.
Wow.
Of that. Okay.
Yeah. So.
And I have some other little things I'll talk about in just a minute. But like, for example, all right, I'm going to do some poppy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, again, I think the biggest challenge for anyone, of course, is what do I do to not contaminate my product?
Right.
Because you don't want to contaminate your customer. And that's a financial expense that we don't want to think about trying to get by in an unsafe manner. Right. And that's why, I mean, of all the gluten-free bakeries I've been to, they've always been gluten-free. They haven't been anything otherwise. But I haven't seen a gluten-free bagel in any of those shops currently. But the other thing is, there's some large manufactured ones, but you have to look at what texture they have, and you have to respect the texture that it has because of the system that they're using.
Right.
This is very, you look at the finished product here, it's very, well, they're handcrafted, via the piping bag or hand shaped. But again, the bigger thing is boiling, poaching before you bake. Now, when someone says, my bagel that I buy, it's too chewy. Well, if it's a traditional bagel, it's supposed to be chewy. And that's because it's been poached before it's baked.
Right.
The alternative, which, as many of you know, when you're buying, say, pre-made raw bagels, you can put them in the proof box, which will allow them to get soft. And then, but word about the shine, then you bake them in a hot oven, like a rack oven, with steam. And you'll get the color, but you're not going to get this chewy texture because the interior has not received that poaching liquid temperature.
Right.
But it gives you someone said this to me, White. They used the word, it was more of like a West Coast style bagel as opposed to a New York bagel.
Yeah.
And, but I don't want to, get people mad who live on the West Coast, but I think, you look at the quality of your ingredients, the bigger argument always is, well, New York bagels are using New York water. Okay, yes, but it's about the chemistry and the aesthetics of the characteristics of that water.
Yeah.
If you have the right water, as making good bread, you need good water. Same with the bagels, but the chewiness versus the soft, that's a difference in poaching as opposed to proofing. Baking the proof bagels in a steam oven, but you're not going to get that chewy texture because they have not internally reached that temperature.
So what would happen if you baked the bagels you piped out in a steam injected oven instead of poaching them first? Would they turn into a bagel like product?
They might actually change their shape a little because the steam might cause the surface to stay so soft, and then the internal pressure may cause it to shift. Actually, what I do a lot of times is, even with these bagels, I'm going to put these in the oven.
Okay.
I can give them a blast of steam.
Yeah.
Just to keep them wet. And my theory on that, in fact, when I bake a lot of gluten-free products, bread-wise, I always add a little steam because you don't have the same effect of the surface, but oven spring is oven spring. Now, even though we have a gluten-free system, the water vapor in the dough is going to want to expand. So if you hit a little steam, even in a regular gluten-free bread or roll, that keeps the exterior soft. And it allows what pressure that can occur from within to expand the product. And then it'll help with the color. It's not going to really help with a golden brown crust, though. So these can go on the deck or they can go on the convection. I'm going to just use this convection oven that's right here.
Okay.
And I have it up to around 475.
475. Good.
And the deck oven, 485 or even hotter is good. I am going to add just a little bit of steam, not too much. And that's going to keep the outside soft.
Right.
And you have to bake it till you get that internal temperature roughly, as I stated, I think it was like 85, give or take. They should be nice and golden brown, but internal temperature is easy to achieve because we've done some of it already on the stove internally with the poaching liquid. So.
Right. So, and then all that dough that you just made that's still in the mixer, do you have a fairly good, like large window of time where you can still deal with it, as opposed to just, like, does it have to be shaped and frozen right away, or do you have an hour or so?
Not an hour. I'd say, normally I would get this piped out in, say, less than 30 minutes. And then go right to the freezer uncovered so they get really cold. I think, the longer you let it go, it's going to start to move, but it's going to feel easier to pipe, but then you're going to actually lose some of the actual density of it. So, you want to go quickly. And, this isn't a large batch. I mean, I think, myself and one assistant, we could have these piped out in, say, less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. And so, and then you got them in at about 475, and they're going to bake for approximately 15 minutes or so, or?
Yeah, it shouldn't be much more than that. These are pretty, as you can see, these are pretty beefy bagels. But I sliced one this morning. I put it through an Impingeur oven, and I had to run it through twice, but it actually got some crispiness. And a couple of colleagues, they liked the way it tasted. And, it doesn't have maybe the internal visual look but it has the structure. So, and
so those bagels that are sitting there, they didn't, the holes did not close up as much as a wheat bagel might, because it doesn't have quite that much.
right,
aeration,
it doesn't have that gluten to help it kind of contract. So when you're shaping these, if you make the hole a little too big, it's going to stay big. But you can get it pretty close if you want a tighter hole on the bagel. But definitely you can do that.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. So it's okay to pipe them a little with a smaller hole, so that if you want to use it as a sandwich, like if you're going to put a lox and bagel sandwich together,
Correct.
you got there, you don't want to have that hole fall through. I think that's one of the reasons why the steamed bagels got traction during the last 30 years, was that they became very sandwich friendly because they're softer, and that made it a much more mainstream product as opposed to a New York City or Chicago type product.
Right. In fact, at the bakery I worked at, they were traditional New York style. They had a fairly tight hole center, but some of our clientele at the time were elderly, and the bagel was just way too tall with the chicken salad or the Reuben sandwich, corned beef, and the owners came up with an idea, which this was over 30 years ago. It worked. We actually would take long strips of bagel dough, and we would braid the bagel dough kind of hollow-like, but I think it was a 3-braid. And we would put it in the refrigerator on the cornmeal boards, and then we would boil this braided loaf of bread. And then we would then seed it, put it in the oven, and it was something you could slice really thin.
Wow.
So it had a tight density, chewy density of a bagel, but it didn't have as much crust. So our elderly customers could actually enjoy their sandwich without struggling.
Wow. That's a great idea. So it's like a bagel loaf.
Yeah, this was before the internet. Say how old I am, but I believe it was written up in the New York Times, and it was called bagel bread.
Bagel bread.
It was a small bagel shop in Providence at the time. So
interesting. So I could see if that were coming out today, it would be all over Instagram like crazy.
Yeah, maybe they'll be like hashtag bagel bread.
Yeah.
But
so can you do the same
hashtag,
thing?
So
can you do the same thing with that dough that you just made? Can you make a bagel loaf with that dough? Would it be bake up as a loaf?
I haven't tried, but now that you're asking, it may not look the prettiest, but I would think, in fact, let me give it a shot since you asked. I've got an extra bag here. Yeah. Oh, why not?
Who knows? Maybe right here on the very stage, we're going to invent a new loaf.
Well,
but I guess the part of the question is that the ingredients themselves are fairly consistent with gluten-free type breads. And so could this same dough that you made today for bagel application, can it be used in other bread type applications?
Oh, sure. I think the bigger thing is when I make more of my specific gluten-free breads, I have a couple of pointers that I'll mention. If I'm going to bake it the same day that I'm making it, what I'll do is I use carbonated bottled water. And it helps to make the mixture more bubbly, lighter. But you have to then proof it and bake it. If you're going to not bake it the same day, you're going to say, make your bread, put it in the refrigerator or freeze it. Don't use the carbonated water, because what will happen is the carbonation will dissipate, and your product will drop while it's in the refrigerator. So, you want to carry that carbonation forward if you're going to use it.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
And, again, the other thing, this is my comfort zone. I make most of my gluten-free breads with pans that have sidewalls to allow the mixture to grab and hold on to the sidewall. In fact, I've seen a gluten-free loaf pan for sale in the consumer market, where you buy a gluten-free mixture and you make it. But the loaf pan, Peter, is just a loaf pan. It's not a special metal. It's 30% taller on the side all the way around.
Oh.
Because the gluten-free mixture is more wet, it needs that extra space to work its way up and hold on to. And actually, but then people will say, well, how do I tell when the bread is baked? Well, you got to check the temperature. It takes longer. It's almost like a cake. You're trying to get that moisture out.
Right.
And one of the simplest pans that can work to help bake the center when someone says, well, it's collapsing, it's not staying together, is a bundt pan, a tubular pan. I know it's more for cakes, but if you think about it, like an angel food cake pan, that center hole is going to allow the mixture to bake and radiate heat from the center outward, and then bake from the outer walls inward.
So that makes sense. So you can you just slice it into slices that way. Yeah. That's a great tip.
All right. So for your request, I'm going to just stop and think here for a second. Okay. All right. Here goes nothing or something. So, it still has enough texture. What I'm trying to do is kind of make like a braided pattern.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
And this is a first, but I'm only doing this for you, Peter.
Well, maybe we'll be able to. Well, you're gonna have to freeze it, right? So we won't be able to see the finished results today. But
I will have to freeze it. So,
well, let me know when you shoot me a photo. Maybe we can post it later. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Another idea could be is if I was using a loaf pan. All right, so I'll just start right there.
Yeah.
If I work quickly with it.
There you go. Yeah.
Put it in the freezer. I really want to see, and I'll finish this tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I'll send you a picture, and I'm actually interested now that got me started. But another way it could be is in a loaf pan is, kind of like little balls of brioche dough.
Yeah.
You could squeeze these in, and one right after the other. If you catch it at the right point, it should hold its difference of texture at the top, but then at the bottom, everything fuses together.
Yeah.
And, then that would be a win-win. So I'll put this in the freezer.
All right. Well, this one could go in your next book, Richard.
I'm not. How many books have you written? Because I don't know if I'm all booked out or not.
It's a lot of work, isn't it? I know you've done. I know you've done the gluten-free, but you've done other books, haven't you? Before
I wrote one on baking for special diets. And there's a little bit of gluten-free information in it. There's dairy-free information, sugar substitutes. And I think that whole skill set that future bakers, pastry cooks need to understand is not everybody eats the same. Not everybody can eat the same. People have options, but people want to go out to eat. And bakery goods generally make us happy, make us smile. I'll tell you a quick story. This was about 15 years ago. It was a graduation morning, and we were taking a break from class, and I was walking down the hall, and I just walk along, stretch my legs out, and I stopped walking because there was this little boy on the floor, and he was looking up at me, and I was looking down at him. And the long and short of it is he was 2.5, and his mother was about 40 feet away from us. She was watching her 21-year-old son graduating from the culinary degree program at the time. So the 2.5-year-old brother, he didn't care about the ceremony. So she was letting him run off within sight. And then she looks and sees what appears to be Chef Coppedge is about to step on my son. But I didn't. So she walks over to me to retrieve her son. It's a true story. But the kid was making still noise. He was being a young child. So when people walk by, they might have thought I did step on him, but for the record, I never did. So I'm thinking, what can I do to kind of quiet this kid in a nice way? And I'm thinking food. And so I offered to the mother, I said, how about I go around the corner to one of our bake shops and get him a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie. And she said, thank you, but no thanks. He has celiac disease.
Mm.
And she had an Eastern European accent. And we talked. And I said, well, you know what, ma'am? I said, I teach gluten-free baking. I have some cookies upstairs in my bake shop. So she and her son followed me. We had a gluten-free chocolate chip cookie in our freezer. I warmed it up in the microwave. I gave it to her. She handed it to her 2.5-year-old son. And Peter, it was the first cookie that he could eat.
Wow.
You couldn't get the cookie off of him. You would have had to,
Yeah.
remove his hands or something. And then we talked, and then she came back, and I met her now graduate alumnus of the culinary. And I wrote a simple yellow layer cake that was gluten-free recipe that she took home. So I'll ask you, Peter, if you've been doing the math, what did she do with that cake recipe 6 months from that day? Well, I see one of my technicians has the answer.
With that cake, 6 months. No, I'm not getting it.
All right, Jim, what is it?
Birthday cake?
You made it. The mother made a birthday cake that was gluten-free for her son when he turned 3.
Got it. That's great. Yeah.
And it was like, it was beautiful. Cookie he could eat. 6 months later, that was cake. And, it was very humbling moment.
Yes, a life-changing moment for her too, because those kinds of recipes didn't exist back then. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't email it per se, so I just wrote it on a piece of scrap paper, and it worked. And but nowadays, you can buy a national brand gluten-free yellow cake mix, and just mix it yourself, and not have any worries, and enjoy the moment. So let me take a look at these.
Okay, let's look at these bagels. Yeah. Because people are asking, what do they taste like? Okay, so when you're ready, well, maybe you can give us a frame of reference. And also, do you have any idea how much each bagel weighs? Is it about a 4-ounce bagel in the end?
Well, these ones are, as I said, they're big. They're about 6 to 8 ounces.
Oh, they're that big. Okay. So they're big. They're more bread than a typical.
Oh yeah, you can make them smaller.
Okay.
Obviously. Ready tonight. Let's take a look. I think they need a little more time. In fact, I'm going to take this one out. I'm going to put these back in. Show you the inside. And, the seeds really help to kind of give it a protective covering.
Uh-huh.
So, but you can see, now this was in a convection oven, but we have a good bake on the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm going to break it open. See the steam coming out.
Yeah.
We have some cell structure holes.
Yeah, it does.
It's a little gummy still because it needs to go a little longer.
Yeah, but it's still hot. But it does have a really nice texture.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So there wasn't any sugar in the recipe at all, was there, or was there?
The only sugar is really from the liquid of the poaching.
So only on the surface. So the caramelization is mostly a result of the molasses and stuff that was in the water.
Right, and the poaching liquid, also a little steam blast. But it does have soy flour in it, and I do like soy flour for its protein content, and it can help to give some color. If you go a little too high on soy flour in some recipes, then I find that you might get this aroma that almost appears like a wet grass. And that's kind of a natural aroma I find from soy, but it smells like bread. And well, I'm going to pass over a piece to my technician, and he's going to try it. I'm going to see if he gives me a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Somebody on that plate that's got the onions. Is that onion lox, and what's in the middle?
Yeah, we got some CIA lox. We got some green onion, scallion, cream cheese, and some red onion.
So that's cream cheese in the middle there? Yeah,
just with some green onions.
I have a feeling your tech crew is going to have a nice a nice little
I got
brunch.
2 thumbs up, one from each of the technicians.
Yeah, it's actually very crispy outside
Okay.
and soft on the inside.
Nice,
So
nice.
here, this is one I baked this morning.
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slice it open.
And while you're doing that, because we have only time for another minute or so, and then we'll switch over to the after party.
Okay.
But I think this will come up in the after party. We can talk about it more there. Is if for people not knowing that you're also sensitive to allergen-free issues beyond just gluten, what could people substitute for the egg white that is so vital to this particular recipe? Is there something that they could use instead?
I had a feeling you were gonna ask that, and I get asked that not often, but that's not to say the Achilles heel.
Yeah.
Just pull these out. So you can see we have a little more color.
Excellent. Just that extra minute or two made a
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. That's fantastic.
Here we
There
go.
we go. There it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Fantastic.
All right.
That one right at the bottom there with the everything bagel. That looks like the hole is just the right size.
Yeah.
Then it'll hold the filling of some sort.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So regarding the egg white, tough challenge. And I just think that it's going to take some experimenting, trial and error. But I haven't seen a plant-based egg white egg replacer that works like eggs or egg whites. But I think using a pulse flour like garbanzo bean with about maybe 20% guar gum as part of, so like for example, if we take the albumin, 57 grams of albumin that's in the recipe, and use about 47 grams of, say, garbanzo bean flour, and then the rest could be guar gum to make up that number.
Uh-huh.
You're gonna have to experiment because, egg white protein is, I love it. It's in one of my flour blends in my book, and it can really make things stay together.
And as somebody who doesn't have the sensitivity to eggs and loves eggs, it's a miracle food to me for so functional. So, but it's coming up a lot these days. Have you done any work with garbanzo water as an egg, as an egg replacer?
Actually, I've used it like for some desserts, but in thinking about that realm idea, yes, I'd have to maybe replace some of the water in the recipe with the aquafaba. I haven't tried it yet, but that's very high in protein, and it's going to probably take about a reformulation effort of a couple of different things, but that's an option too.
Well, let's continue this conversation in the the more informal setting. But I'm real loving, the ideas behind this. It's so important, and as you said, we have to keep coming up with new approaches and use what we learned before and build on it to come up with new techniques as we move forward. This category is not going to go away. It's only going to get bigger and more, be more demand for wheat-free and gluten-free type products. And these bagels look pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm cutting some for the crew here. They worked really hard behind the scenes, John and Jim.
If you were to be able to describe the flavor of the bagel, what are some of the flavor tones that you're picking up in there? It's obviously not going to be the flavor of wheat. It's going to be it's kind of a bread like.
You know what I'll say, Peter? It has like a rye orientation, like a deli rye orientation because of the buckwheat.
Yeah.
It does taste meaty to me.
Yeah, and one of the technicians says it has a wheat texture taste, and so he's going to try it with some lox and cream cheese and onions if they like, and that's for them. And I mean, it works. It's a work in progress. I could, maybe more work. I think my next level will be like, yes, the request was making it truly vegan.
That'll be the holy grail. Yeah. Well, let's continue that conversation as we go over to the after party. You and I, of course, will log out of here and we'll log back in. everyone else who's already in can just migrate over to the VIP lounge. Those of you who are watching who are not coming to the VIP party, we will see you on Monday with Josh Allen, who's going to be talking about, well, he calls it trash talk. So he's going to give us a little trash talk on Monday. And then after that, we're coming down to the sort of final ceremonies of this year's International Symposium of Bread. Chef Coppedge, I'm so pleased that you were able to join us and be a part of it this year. And I want to thank you, for this demo and for all the work you put in to prepare for it. And by the way, I'm sure, your old friends from Johnson & Wales University are very proud of you and everything that you've done since your Providence days. So we love to see what you're up to there. And,
oh yeah, I know. Please give them my best. I know there's a few there that are still there, and may try to get back there to visit. I'd like to see you in person. So
well, maybe at our next symposium, maybe we'll be live,
okay.
And we'll get you over there.
All right.
So we'll head over to the after party. All of you, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Our event technical and production partners, Ganoid Communications, including our producer, Gurmit Singh, and his team, Jita Gajaria, Gagandeep Singh, and Jaydev Kashari. Thanks also to Ted Nelson and Lael Fretzel of our creative and marketing team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University who supported me throughout this event. My executive assistant, Sarah Standifer, Communications Director, Melinda Law, Chancellor, Mim Rooney, Charlotte Campus President, Cheryl Richards, and our executive team leaders, deans and faculty, Maureen Dumas, Michael Schrader, Michelle Nicholas, Mark Norman, Brent Steyerwalt, Laurie Heimbach, Jerry Lanuza, Amy Felder, Harry Paymiller, Richard Miskovich, and many, many others. Thank you all.